Welcome to Scoolinary, the online cooking school that transforms people and connects cultures. You will learn with the best chefs in the industry, and you will discover the broadest online catalog of topics related to gastronomy. We publish new courses every week. In our podcast, we have coffee with a chef every week. Each of them will tell us about their experience and their vision for the culinary world to help you better understand this exciting industry. Come on, join us for coffee. So today we're having coffee with Shenarri Freeman, aka Shari Greens. Shenarri is the executive chef at Cadence in New York City, where her plant-based soul food dishes helped the restaurant earn a top 10 ranking in 2021 by the New York Times. For 2023, Shenarri was named one of Forbes 30 under 30 in the food and drink category, and without stopping to celebrate her success, she recently opened Ubuntu, a West African vegan restaurant in Los Angeles, California. Her Scoolinary course is called Vegan Soul Food and features some classic dishes like creamed collard greens and smoked grits. Whether soul food or West African dishes, her recipes stay loyal to a theme, yet it's her incredible creativity with vegan ingredients that has the culinary world buzzing about this rising chef. Hi, Shenarri. Welcome and thanks for joining us for coffee.
Hi, thank you for having me today.
So before we kick this off, do you drink coffee?
I do.
How do you take your coffee?
Many different ways. If I'm on the go, I usually get like a dirty chai latte with oat milk. But I always like a little bit of espresso in my coffee.
So I introduced you, but I'd really like to hear in your own words who you are and where you're from so that our listeners have a chance to get to know you a little bit better. So please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Shenarri Freeman. I am originally from Richmond, Virginia. I grew up there. I spent, pretty much all of my childhood there, surrounded by a pretty big, loving family. So I've always been, around food, soul food to be exact. Later on, I relocated to Washington, D.C. for my undergrad program at Howard University. I actually studied pre-physical therapy, so I was always interested in health and just kind of understanding how the body works. During my time in DC, I got my foot into the hospitality industry, a little bit of back of house and front of house, which eventually prompted me to relocate to New York to pursue culinary. During my time in New York, I went to the Institute of Culinary Education, studying a plant forward program with the Health Supportive Culinary Arts program that they offered. And from that point on, I've just been cooking in a few kitchens. I landed an executive chef position with Overthrow Hospitality, which is how I opened Cadence. And, that was a really great success. I think the New York food community was very opening and just welcoming to the concept of vegan soul food and Southern food. 2-3 years forward, I have relocated to Los Angeles, California, where I am working on a concept of West African inspired vegan food. So I've been cooking and in the food industry for quite some time.
Yeah, how's the new restaurant going?
It's great. We've only been open for a few weeks, but we're pretty busy most nights. We're getting a lot of high profile guests in there, which is really exciting. And, this is my second restaurant opening as an executive chef. So I have a little bit more on my resume, a little bit more support. I know a little bit more going into this concept. So it's been quite a breeze and super excited to be on the West Coast.
Nice. Can you tell us a little bit about what's on the menu at Ubuntu?
Yeah, so with Ubuntu, we are focusing on West African inspired ingredients and recipes that happen to be vegan. So pulling inspiration from pulling inspiration from Senegal dishes, dishes from Ghana, dishes from Nigeria, just to start. But eventually that will branch out a bit more. Some of the dishes that we have, I would say our star dish right now is definitely the jollof rice arancini. That's probably our most popular dish. I think when people, think about rice and they think about West African cuisine, jollof rice is definitely one of the go-to dishes. So it's been really exciting to create another layer to this dish and turn it into a nice arancini so that it's nice and easy. to bite and to share with loved ones at the table.
That sounds really nice. So,
Mhm.
how did you get the nickname Shenarri Greens?
Funny enough, that nickname came from a friend when I was thinking about, figuring out what my personal brand name would be. And I always thought my name was super unique. I don't know anybody else with my name. So I figured, I definitely wanted to brand my name, and me focusing on health and wellness and cooking vegan and plant based foods. The green somewhat just naturally came with it. It also happens to be my favorite color. So, I thought it was very fitting.
Oh, good. Did that influence the interior decoration of Ubuntu? I read somewhere there was some deep green velvet interior decoration.
Yes, I like to always incorporate a little bit of green into my cooking, into like any interior or anything that I do. It's all it's all like a part of my like personal branding, but I want people to kind of feel me when they walk into my rooms, restaurants, and when they're eating my food. So
Sure.
very intentional.
So, well, yeah, yeah, like you said, it's a little bit of branding. So, you started, you adopted a plant-based diet prior to going to culinary school. So, when did you start adopting a plant-based diet, and what was that like at first?
I believe I started around 20. Hmm. Okay, how old am I? I believe I started around 2015 or 2016. At the time, I was living in Washington D.C. I was working in the restaurant industry, but at this point, I was actually working front of house. So I was a floor manager at a restaurant, managing the staff. I was also doing a little bit of event planning, social media, marketing, things of that nature. And I think the lifestyle that I was living, just, working late, always partying, always on the go, not really taking time for myself. My food choices weren't really giving me the energy that I needed to keep up with my lifestyle. So I figured, let me like stop, pause, do like a deep reset. So initially it started as just a 30-day detox, no drinking, no partying, eating vegan, just wanted to kind of clear things out of my system. And, I started kind of seeing the benefits very quickly of the diet. And it went from 30 days to about 7, 8 years. So,
Yeah.
well, initially it was just a detox, and, I kind of enjoyed the benefits along the way.
And you found a specific program. You were looking, as far as I understand, you were looking for a plant-based culinary program, and I think you succeeded in finding that.
Yes, it was definitely one of those things, right timing, right place. I was looking to relocate to New York, and well, actually relocate anywhere, but New York is just where I had, more friends and familiar faces. So I was looking for a culinary program. I couldn't find an accredited one, and ironically, when I went to the open house for the Institute of Culinary Education, they had announced that they were launching a health forward culinary program. So I immediately signed up within like a month. So, it was really right timing and right place.
Yeah, and you've mentioned through a few interviews that you have a real deep connection to soul food.
Mhm.
Soul food is a heritage cuisine most closely identified with the American South. And I was wondering if you could explain to us what soul food is.
Soul food is many different things for many different people. I think everyone has a different definition for it. Ultimately, what soul food means for me is just it really is cooking from the soul. It's cooking from the heart. It's a exterior extension of yourself, and it's an outward expression of love, and it's just coming through food. So rather that be just sharing a meal with yourself or just one other person or a big group. Ultimately, I think what it really boils down to is love, soul, and community. So that's kind of how I envision soul food, and that was my initial introduction to it growing up in Virginia. So we always had soul food around. There was always family around. It was always very intentional meals. It was always a community effort. So everybody was cooking, everybody was helping out or peeling potatoes or, cleaning greens or something like that. So, very early on, I got introduced to a concept of community and family and what that meant. And, I'm very happy to be raised on this cuisine.
Yeah. So, in addition to love, soul, and community, what are some of the other essential ingredients to soul food?
Um, there's a lot. I think
Yeah.
I think the most important essential when it comes to soul food is definitely flavor, right? I can't think of any soul food that I've ever tasted, like any soul food dish or recipe that I've ever tasted that didn't have flavor. So it's never bland. Um, I think it's sophisticated in its own way when we think about like flavor profiles, when we think about like the palette, the different spices and seasonings used into it. When we think about some of the methods as well, when we're thinking about like pickling things, cooking things for a long extended time, when we're thinking about like crock pots and things of that nature. There's so many different layers to it. And it's such like a unique cuisine. I think right off the bat, a lot of people associate soul food with just like fried chicken or something like that. But there's so many other dishes and recipes and layers to it. But ultimately, I would say it boils down to flavor.
Yeah. And you're reinventing soul food and now West African cuisine to make them plant based. Have you had some challenges to that along the way? And if so, what are they?
I think there's always a challenge. I think vegan and plant based cooking is challenging within itself because you're making vegetables and fruits and grains and nuts and things of that nature the star of the plate when most times they're on the side. So I think, plant based cooking itself is challenging. When it comes to, cooking Southern food and cooking West African inspired food, I think the main thing is, again, maintaining those flavors, but also one of the biggest challenges is texture, right? So
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily replicating certain dishes or, I'm not trying to make like fake food, I guess, like using like too many soy products or processed foods. Like I'm solely cooking vegetables. So, it can be challenging sometimes when like a traditional fried chicken dish or I'm trying to substitute that texture. So I have to go fry like an oyster mushroom, but make sure, the flavor is still there and it's not getting lost. Texture is always a challenge when it comes to plant-based cooking, but I picked up a lot of those skills and that understanding and that knowledge in culinary school. So, I'm always applying that to my cooking within the restaurants and outside as well.
Yeah, and you just touched upon that subject. I think what distinguishes your vegan dishes isn't only your inventiveness, but also your refusal to use highly processed plant based ingredients. So, if
Mhm.
you're willing, how do you develop your vegan recipes?
Um, I think it's always research. It's always research, and usually it comes from like my family or what I'm familiar with or things that I grew up eating. However, when I'm exploring and dining at restaurants and things of that nature, I do look at a lot of cookbooks. Now I do. I didn't used to, but I recently started within like the past 2 or 3 years, especially cooking more like West African cuisine. So I read a lot of cookbooks. I might make a recipe. Um, I'll read cookbooks, I'll read recipes, and I'll start kind of like swapping out certain ingredients. Usually the animal products, I'll start swapping those things out just to see how it tastes. And from that point on, I will kind of like add in my own flavor profile or, do things that I think will help enhance the dish because a lot of times when you're cooking with like animal products and like animal fats and proteins and things of that nature, those things add to the dish in a lot of different ways in terms of
Yeah.
texture, flavor. So I have to kind of make up for that when I'm doing vegan and plant-based cooking. So it's
Hmm.
not always just, it's not always just substituting chicken with like an oyster mushrooms. Like sometimes I have to incorporate the fat. So if I'm not using like chicken fat, I have to use some type of vegan fat. So it's a lot of science to it, a lot of
Yeah.
chemistry and a lot of recipe development. But, ultimately I would say it's all recipe development. Like I have to try these things. It's all trial and error, and that's how I kind of build my dishes.
Yeah, and I think there's also a little bit of fearlessness involved in that too. Specifically, in your Meet Your Instructor video on Scoolinary, you really encouraged people. One of your pieces of advice was not to be afraid to go outside your comfort zone.
Hmm.
And that you followed that up and said that you made some of your best dishes by accident.
Hmm.
So I
Yeah.
was wondering if you could share an example of when you left your own comfort zone to develop a dish.
Um, I think there's so many. That's a great question. There's so many examples of how I left my comfort zone. I think growing up in my household, there was just like growing up in my household and like adapting that cooking style, using some of those seasonings and those flavors. I somewhat thought that was always like the golden ticket. I always thought that was like just the way to go to cooking, and you can't tell me anything else. My mom's cooking's the best. My family's cooking is the best. So when I got to culinary school, it was such a shock to be creating some of these dishes and pulling more flavor from the vegetables than seasoning. I think, you know, what can I say? Yes. So I think, I think attending culinary school is really when I kind of figured out how to leave my comfort zone with the way that we would layer dishes and let the vegetables kind of lead in terms of flavor, instead of over seasoning them, overcooking them, just kind of like getting them really outside of their natural state. I really figured out how to cook. I think growing up, I would use my go-to seasonings, or sometimes would just be like salt, onion powder, garlic powder, Old Bay. But when I got to culinary school, we would do things like we would be cooking, and we would be given these recipes, and I would go through the recipes. It would be a lot of things that perhaps I've cooked with before but not in that style. Or I would look at the seasonings and it would only be like two. It would be like salt and cumin, or like salt and,
Hmm.
I don't know, like coriander or something like that. And in my head I'm just like, well, that's not going to taste good. There's not enough seasonings there. But in reality, I had to learn how to actually enjoy the natural flavor of vegetables because I didn't grow up like
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
So that's really one way I learned how to, let the vegetables lead. Don't always depend on so much like heavy seasoning and cooking techniques. Like sometimes you really have to trust the product that you're cooking with. Appreciate its natural flavor and just slightly add things like maybe a little bit of acid, or like maybe a little bit of salt or heat, so that those flavors can be highlighted within your dish. So I think that's like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's like one of the main ways.
Yeah, you seem to have grasped the techniques or embraced them or actually owned them. You're everywhere. You're in the New York Times, you're in Forbes, you're in Eater, you're in a variety of Los Angeles media outlets right now. And opportunities seem to find you, but that's because you worked really hard to define your culinary identity. How would you describe yourself as a chef, as an entrepreneur, and as an industry leader?
I would describe myself as a real person. I'm not perfect. I'm not one of those chefs that, I'm never too good for anything. Like I'm never too good to talk to anyone or hold a conversation. I don't think I'm above any type of opportunity. I don't consider myself like a know-it-all when it comes to like vegan plant-based cooking. I'm always just open. Like I'm open to talking to people. I'm open to, you know, reading emails and sifting through my DMs, seeing what's going on there. I'm always open to learning. I'm open to, being a sous chef with some of my chef friends and cooking with them and learning with them. So, I all in all, I'm definitely a trailblazer, and I think I'm showing cooking in a different light. Um, just having like a pretty good balance, personal life and professional life, and I try to highlight that through my different channels of um, I just try to highlight that through different channels, whether it's me cooking in the kitchen and people are surprised at how nice and like silly I am. I think people assume I'm a bit more like strict and uptight or something like that. So people feel like a bit more at ease and comfortable working with me. I mean, we are pretty serious about what we're doing, but I don't think we need to have like those super high intense work environments, especially if we're spending more time there than at home. So
Yeah.
I try to make things like fun and comfortable for people, just valuing their time as well.
Yeah, and that's you've established quite a following, and now people look to you uh, as a trailblazer. That was a I couldn't think of a better word. That's certainly true. So, as a chef now, and considering this following, do you feel like you have a social responsible to your community, whether it's your community in LA, your community in New York, your roots in Virginia, and your industry? And I want to know, what does that look like to you?
I have a lot of responsibilities. Ultimately, I think my main responsibility, which was my goal, coming into this industry, is just simply to share information, whether it be recipes, whether it be, certain outlets or certain resources or just information on vegan and plant based cooking. I think ultimately my responsibility is to share information. I've been in this industry for, I think, it's been 12 years now. I've been in this industry, and it's kind of pointless to come this far, do this well, be this successful, meet all these people, have like this huge network, and keep it to myself. It feels a bit irresponsible, and honestly, it's overwhelming to me. So
Yeah,
I always just try to like share my resources with people. And then I think in terms of, being a black woman and being a chef and both my both my black community but also my chef community, it's my responsibility to share the opportunities. Like I have to be mentoring people. Like I have to work with a mentor. Like I have to give back. I have to work with students in high school to get them into culinary school. Like I do so many things that I don't necessarily promote, but I have these responsibilities as an individual with this position, and I don't take it lightly. I really don't.
right. Wow. Well, thank you. It's great to have people like you in the industry. Yeah, in one of your recent Instagram posts, you said, "We need to be cooking our food. We need to be celebrating our food, and we need to tell our stories."
Mhm.
And who is that message for?
That message is for people of the diaspora because oftentimes our stories are not told by us, but they're told for us. So it's a bit of reclaiming our food, reclaiming our time and, reclaiming our recipes and all of the things of that nature. But ultimately, I want people to feel pride in cooking their native food or pride in learning a bit more about like Southern foodways or the influence of African cuisine on um, in the U.S. and globally as well, because it's not just limited. Granted, I'm from the United States, and I only have but so much of an understanding of food. And I'm kind of backtracking. I'm kind of uh, doing a bit more of a deep research into how West African cuisine specifically has had such an influence on Southern foodways and here in the States. I really want to look at that on a global aspect as well. Because it's not just here, it's happening everywhere. And I'm starting to really see it a bit more now. I think a long
Yeah,
time I think a long time, people were looking at other cuisines as like the lead in the culinary world. A lot of times people look at French cuisine, Japanese cuisine, Italian. just to name a few, but no one's really highlighting the influence of African cuisine throughout the world. So, that message is for the people that have kind of like been in the shadows of the culinary industry and haven't really been able to shed a light on it. So, again, I have this platform. Why not shed a light on it a little bit more? And why not start collaborating and working with those individuals that have been doing this work for so long, but just may not necessarily, have the resources to highlight it as much as I do. So I think that's, it kind of ties back into my responsibility as a chef.
Yeah. And speaking of stories, I think I read in researching for this episode that you may have a cookbook coming out soon. You don't need to go into too many details if you don't want to, but I was wondering if you could give us any hints or any clues to what that might look like.
I do have a cookbook coming out eventually. I'm not sure when. Um, I'm not sure the actual direction I want to take with the book. So it may be a situation where there's, more than one book along the way. I'm kind of in between the ideas of what I want my first book to look like versus what I want a few books to look like. But ultimately, I will be focusing on plant-based cuisine, whether that's going to be highlighting Southern cuisine to start or highlighting the more globally diaspora-inspired cuisine. I'm not sure yet, but it will definitely be a vegan, plant-based, plant-forward cookbook.
Oh, cool. So, as we mentioned before, you've opened Cadence in New York City and now Ubuntu in LA. So, you have a pretty firm foothold in the restaurant industry right now. I wanted to ask you what would you like the restaurant industry to be like in the near future? In other words, if you could design it, how would you do it?
I would definitely like to see. There's so many dreams and aspirations for our beloved industry. I think one of the main things I would love to see, especially within like vegan and plant based dining, I would love to see more farm to table establishments where the farmers are working with more restaurants. Just to kind of like help get their produce out there, help promote them as well, and we're able to kind of get we're able to get a grip on sustainability a bit more and kind of like build those farmer to consumer to clientele relationships and get those like a little bit tighter. I think that's my ultimate like dream for our industry versus getting our food from some of these big time vendors and purveyors and things of that nature. I want it to be more farm to table. And then what else would I like to see? I would like to see more Black women chefs leading restaurants, from ownership to restaurateurs to bartenders, floor managers, chefs, all of that. Like I would love to see a little bit more of that. Um, I don't see that many. I know a lot of chefs, but a lot of them aren't in restaurants for a number of reasons. But I would love to see more Black women entrepreneurs and chefs leading kitchens.
So based on that, who would you recommend for a future episode of this podcast? Someone related to the culinary world.
Ooh, uh, there's so many. I know so many people. Um, I would definitely have to say my dear friend Kamari Mick. She is the pastry chef for a lovely place in New York called Musket Room, which she recently got her first Michelin star. Really excited for her. And she is now the owner of their second location called Ralph's, where she has like a daily pastry operation going down in the mornings, along with doing the pastry and desserts for the dinner service. So I would really love to see Kamari on this show because she makes some of the best pastries I've ever seen in my life.
Great, that's a great suggestion. Thank you. I don't think I've ever had someone with a Michelin star recommended. Hey, thank you so much. That's all I have for now. I mean, of course, I could go on for a while speaking with you, but I'm going to stop right there and say thanks again for joining us for coffee this morning.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm
Great. We'll talk to you soon.
awesome. Thank you.
If you like this episode, don't miss an episode by becoming a member. We're waiting for you each week with more guests. We're on all podcast platforms. Just search for Coffee with Scoolinary. We're also waiting for you at our website and on our social networks, where you can get to know all our courses and teachers.